On today's show, Spencer Dinwiddie, is he the sixth man of the Dallas Mavericks? What could his role be this season? And under the radar storylines that we're tracking this season. On today's Locked On Mavs.
I'm Luka Doncic, and this is Locked On Mavericks podcast.
If you don't believe, you shouldn't be here.
We have Kyrie.
You are Locked On Mavs.
Great, Rusty.
Your daily Dallas Mavericks podcast.
No one's dying.
Part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Amazing.
Your team every day.
Still can't eat milk.
And welcome. You are locked on to the Dallas Mavericks. My name is Nick Angstadt, media member and NBA channel manager for the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for being part of the show and making Locked On Mavs your first listen today. With the best way you can help us grow the show. Listen every day on any podcast platform. Take us with you. Leave a 5-star review. Like the video on YouTube and comment anything below. Let me know on YouTube. Do you expect Spencer Dinwiddie to be closer to the sixth man or the 12th man in the Mavs rotation? Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use that code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Joining me for the first time, he just got through his first season covering the Dallas Mavericks for the Dallas Morning News. What you got for me, Mike Curtis?
Man, it's good to be here. I feel like this is a long time coming. I've been on Locked On Pistons with Cool, and I'm glad to be on Locked On Mavs with you. That was actually a bar.
Cool. That was a bar. I'm done.
But no, really glad to be here, man. Finally settling into Dallas and looking forward to this next season.
Settling into Dallas and we're finally getting out of the hundreds in the heat. moving from Detroit to here must have been like that's quite the change.
Yeah, I don't think I have to worry about as much snow as I did in Detroit. Down here in Dallas.
Just once a year, and maybe not even that much. Today's episode, we're going to get into some under the radar storylines that we haven't talked about too much on this show. We'll talk about some things that we're looking at. Can OMAX earn a spot as a rotational wing for the Mavericks? I'm interested in Jason Kidd, his whole narrative this season, because he's got a lot of support among fans all of a sudden. So what does that mean for him and the expectations on this season? But let's start here, Mike. Spencer Dinwiddie comes back to the Dallas Mavericks and is now doing the, it seems like he's doing going on the Devin Harris, Seth Curry, Tyson Chandler path, where just multiple times he keeps coming back to the Dallas Mavericks. He could have done it as a buyout player last year, but decides not to and went to the Lakers. Now he's back with the Mavericks. And I am curious, one of the storylines we're going to be tracking this season is Spencer Dinwiddie's role and his comeback. To me, I think he comes in right away as the sixth man. We can go back and forth as to, is the sixth man Gafford, is the sixth man Najee Marshall, but Spencer Dinwiddie's going to fill that role. I talked about recently that Spencer Dinwiddie, the Mavericks expect him to be like a spot starter. When Mark Stein reported about Dinwiddie coming back, he was like, the Mavericks had a couple of different options. Spencer Dinwiddie, Dennis Smith Jr., but they liked that Dinwiddie could come in and be a spot starter when Kyrie and Luka eventually miss some games. What are your thoughts on Spencer Dinwiddie's comeback, his role in the team right now, him being a six-man spot starter type guy for the Mavs?
Yeah, for one thing, I like the fit. I think he fills a need that Dallas wanted and actually needed. They needed another playmaker who could handle the ball, who could run the offense, get other people involved, who could get his own shot. I think Spencer Dinwiddie, when healthy, when focused, when at his very best, can be that player for Dallas. We know they got a lot of different options at point guard. They got Dante Exum, who shot a career high from 3 last season, but didn't really pan out in the playoffs. You got Jaden Hardy, a young and up-and-coming guard who's looking for a shot every time he can, but sometimes needs to slow down a little bit, get others involved, which he's shown capable of doing, but just not on a consistent level. But I think Spencer Dinwiddie, like you said, he can come right in and assume those minutes off the bench and kind of give Kyrie and Luka some relief, especially when it comes down to it. They're going to need rest down the stretch because that's what ended up happening last year at the end of the playoff run. Like, they ended up running out of gas. And I think Spencer can come in and give those guys some relief and kind of set things up for that starting group along with the second unit.
Yeah, I think he's the sixth man on this team. That's where I think he is. When the Mavs first signed him, Slightly and I were going back and forth, and Slightly was like, well, I think he's going to get a bunch of DNPs. And I think, I don't know. I think that they see him, like you said, that role where I think he'll be the first guard off the bench. But when you think about a sixth man, we usually think about the Lou Williams, Jamal Crawford type player. It's usually a guard, somebody to come off the bench and run the offense. Do you see him as the sixth man, or is it Gafford? Because I think Gafford will be one of the first players off the bench. Maybe Najee Marshall too. I don't know what Jason Kidd is going to do with his rotation, but do you see Spencer Dinwiddie as the sixth man?
That's a good question. Those you mentioned three prime candidates. You mentioned Daniel Gafford, you mentioned Najee Marshall, and you mentioned Spencer Dinwiddie. Let's just say it's going to be a toss-up between Lively and Gafford for the starting center spot. And it is. It's just a matter of who's going to assume that starting position. If you look at how Jason Kidd did his rotations, especially in the playoffs, it would seem like Lively and Gafford would have 4 to 5 minute stretches each. They were never on the floor for a really long time. They would just get alternated for 4 to 5 minutes. Gafford would probably come out at the 8-minute mark of every first quarter. Then you got Lively coming in to finish out the rest of the quarter, or Gafford could come back in towards the end. So I think it'll be pretty similar to that, but I do think that there's a big chance that Lively could start and we could end up seeing Gafford coming in right at that 8-minute mark.
Yeah, that's like a not under the radar storyline that we've been talking about. Is we all have Lively. I think all of us, like in the media, at least have Lively penciled in as that starter, but we really don't know. And Jason Kidd has made some moves sometimes where we go, okay, it's not really what I expected. JaVale McGee starting at center, not really what I had penciled in a couple years ago. But yeah, to me, Dinwiddie is the sixth man. He's going to come off the bench. He'll have a big role. And you're right, he fits with what the Mavs want to do. He's been in this system before. There's lots of talk about Rudy Gobert recently, and that clip of him jamming on Rudy Gobert in the playoffs just reminded me, was circulating recently, and it just reminded me of how he was better than Brunson at some points during that playoff run in 2022, that he had moments where he was the one that scored 30 points in that game 7 against the Suns. He was the one that was playing well against the Jazz in certain moments. And so I think the Mavs are getting somebody that they really needed in Spencer Dinwiddie, somebody to create his own shot, somebody to create shots for others here and there, and then just be a scorer and a spot starter when Kyrie and Luka are going to miss some time. You're interested. One of the storylines you wanted to bring up was the point guard rotation. So we know it's Luka and Kyrie, right? We're starting there with those two guys. Obviously, they could play the point guard the entire game if they wanted. But then it's Dinwiddie. But Dinwiddie's also played a lot of off guard too. He doesn't have to have the ball in his hands that much. For some reason, he shoots insanely well from 3 when he plays with the Mavericks. Where else do you go with the point guard rotation? Because so far I have penciled in either Hardy or Exum to be in the rotation if Jason Kidd does go with like an 11-man rotation, and even that is a stretch for some coaches.
Yeah, you mentioned Dinwiddie. Obviously, I think he's going to be right there, whether he's on the ball or off the ball. But then you take a look at how the playoffs shaped up, and I think training camp is going to have a lot to do with who gets those minutes out of Hardy or Exum. Hardy got the bulk of those minutes in the playoffs. In those certain times, of course, Exum was buried on the bench, but just his ability to kind of go in with that score first mentality, but he's also able to throw the lob to Gafford or Lively, Derrick Jones Jr. when he was there. Just his ability to do that, I think it gives him a certain type of edge. Whereas you got Exum, who's able to kind of facilitate the offense, but he's not really looking for a shot. He can be a spot-up 3-point shooter. If he's open, he'll take the shot, but I think they need a little bit more aggression from that position. And guys like Dinwiddie, guys like Hardy give you that.
Yeah, the Exum whole run, the last whole couple months of the season, where it just felt like he was so invaluable to what the Mavericks brought. And in the playoffs, you just couldn't figure out what his role was going to be to me, because he just didn't seem like he was ready in there in the moment. That really has thrown a wrench into this, because I would think after the regular season last year, I would go into this season. Let's say the playoffs didn't exist and we just knew the data from the regular season. I would go into this being like, all right, well, Exum has an absolute role in this team. Him and Dinwiddie are going to be fighting for guard minutes off the bench, and Hardy is out of the rotation. And then the playoffs happen, like you say, and we're going, okay, now I'm completely flipping that, because Hardy was the one that stepped up and showed some stuff in those minutes, especially the Western Conference Finals and a little in the finals here and there. And Exum was the one that kind of shied away in that moment. And so I'm really curious what Jason Kidd is going to do with that rotation and those guys coming off the bench especially. Coming up, I want to keep talking about Spencer Dinwiddie because he had some comments about mom and dad and all that, and I'm curious how Mavs fans are going to respond to Spencer Dinwiddie, so we'll talk about that and more coming up.
I don't believe you shouldn't be here.
Today's episode of Locked On Mavs is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, patience, the formula for winning championships. It's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors is everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, juice whirl, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for, just like Spencer Dinwiddie with some juice land. Just some great stuff all the time. And with eBay Motors Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber and not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP. Bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Uh-oh, guess what day it is?
Thanks everybody for hanging out with us on Locked On Mavs, being part of the show, part of the Raccoon Squad, listening every day. Appreciate each and every one of you for checking out the show and listening. For your second listen today, go check out Locked On NBA. I'm going to be on there I was on there on Thursday with Swipa from Locked On Nuggets. We talked about a couple of players that we think have a lot to prove this season. Ja Morant, we talked about him. So go check out Locked On NBA wherever you're listening, watching this. Go check out Locked On NBA, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm here with Mike Curtis from Dallas Morning News. We're talking about Spencer Dinwiddie, what his role is going to be for the Mavericks, and we think he fits really well with what the Mavs want him to do. I think the Mavs are going to give him a really defined role, and I think he's going to come in and fill that well. He can play on the ball, off the ball next to Luka, off the ball next to Kyrie because of his size and shooting ability and all that. I am really curious about Dinwiddie, about how the fans are going to react to him. He had the quote when he decided as a buyout guy. He got bought out last year. The Mavs could have used him. I think him and the Tim Hardaway, Jaden Hardy, Dante Exum spot could have been really helpful for the Mavericks last season. But instead, he decides to join the Lakers and says, when there's when your mom, when something bad happens to you and you want to go home to mama, she's going to treat you one way, but dad is going to push you and challenge you and all that. So he wanted to go to dad with the Lakers. How do you think Mavs fans are going to respond to Spencer Dinwiddie? Do you think they'll even remember that comment? Because they sure remember it in the comment sections all over Mavs spaces online, on YouTube, on Twitter, on Reddit, and all that.
Yeah, it's interesting. When he made that comment, I was covering the Pistons. And, when you're covering a different team, you really don't pay attention sometimes to other teams just because of everything that's going on where you're beat. But I do remember vaguely hearing that line. And it was interesting at the time, but I don't think it's that detrimental to the point where he's going to be received in a negative light. I think there are going to be some fans that's going to remember, that's going to say, hey, you didn't get what you wanted. The grass wasn't green on the other side, so now you want to come back home. But I think he's going to be received very well just because he's still a good player at the end of the day. I think he still provides value to this team. And I know we talked about his play earlier, but I think his leadership, his vocal leadership will be an asset as well. We're still trying to figure out what's going to happen with the Markieff Morris situation. Is he going to come back or not? Because he was viewed as a great leader. But if Dinwiddie can come in and kind of use the experience that he's had and just use everything he's built up until this point in his career to kind of help some of the younger guys come along, especially at that point guard position, I think that's an asset in itself.
Yeah. With Markieff Morris, by the way, Mark Stein talked about this on DLLS today, is that the Mavs could potentially convert or could waive AJ Lawson, bring him back as a two-way. He still has some two-way eligibility, and then bring back Markieff Morris that way. We've seen Markieff Morris with the team in these like voluntary workouts in LA, that like player run thing that they did. And so I'm curious to see what happens with that situation. But yeah, with Dinwiddie, he was a guy that just really fit right in. And you would think that he seems to be like an eccentric guy sometimes. He had that whole thing with his contract. He wanted to turn his contract into like crypto or, get paid in Bitcoin or whatever the hell he was doing before. And there's always just like a weird story or a weird quote that comes out with him. He fit really well with that team in 2022 when he came in. And then in 2023, it was fine with him too and great with him. And then he got traded for Kyrie. So I think you're right that leadership is going to help. He's played with Kyrie before. I think all this is just going to work together so well. But Jason Kidd is going to have a tough task ahead of him, I think. And so that's one of the other things that I'm really looking at is Jason Kidd, because now the Mavs have expectations. They had expectations at the end of 2022 when they made the Western Conference Finals, but then they lose Brunson, and so then your expectations are a little lower. But now we're going in with the best team that Luka has had in the Luka era, and Jason Kidd is the head coach of this now. There was a lot of people that were ready to move on from Jason Kidd. I'll raise my hand as one of those. During last season, I was ready to move on from Jason Kidd, but now fans are kind of back on since they went to the finals. What do you think about Jason Kidd and how like the expectations are on this Mavericks team now, how he'll handle all that and the support Jason Kidd has gotten over the last couple months or so?
Yeah, first off, me coming in relatively late in the season, last week of the regular season, so I wasn't able to see kind of the ups and downs of the last 2 years. But from what I witnessed, taking that team, when I interviewed for the job that I currently have, the Mavs are hovering around the play-in tournament. Next thing you know, they win 16 out of 18. They claw their way all the way to the 5th seed by the time I got here. And they went against the Clippers in the first round of the playoffs. And a lot of people didn't think they'd be able to win that series, especially if Kawhi was healthy. So I think what he was able to do going on the road, literally for every series of the playoffs to start, to get that team all the way to the finals, I think that's what earned him that contract extension that he got. He got it right after the first round. So I think there is going to be a certain level of expectation when you take a team to the finals. You're almost expected to go back, barring an injury or barring a trade where you probably don't get the best deal. But I think this team is equipped to go back to the finals. I think the big thing for Jason Kidd, he's going to have to figure out how to use Klay Thompson alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. Like, how is that going to fit? Of course, we expect Klay to play the 3 on offense, but does he shift back to the 2 on defense, let Luka play the guy at the 3, Kyrie guard 1, or Najee Marshall, some bigger guy, guard the perimeter player? That's all going to be a tough job for Jason Kidd and his coaching staff. But I think the fans are high on him right now, especially considering the job that he's done. I think he did a really good job just in adjustments throughout the playoffs. I know at certain times it looked bleak. They lost pretty much every game one except the Minnesota series. But
it's by design. It's by design, Mike.
Yeah, it's a long game. Right? But no, I think there are going to be a lot of expectations on Kidd, especially to get this team back to the finals.
I don't know. I don't know if I could say the fans are high on him. I guess there is a high confidence because you go back to that, the fan survey that The Athletic did. And after the 2023 season, they missed the entire postseason. Fans were like, what's your confidence in Jason Kidd? 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, like the highest confidence. Majority said either 2 or 3 that they had confidence in Jason Kidd. So it was basically below average confidence in Jason Kidd. After this past season, they go to the finals. The majority said 4 or 5. Almost 60% said 4. Then they have a 4 confidence in Jason Kidd, which is wild. So I think they have a confidence in him right now. But yeah, the big task for him, like you said, is going to be managing Luka, Kyrie, Klay. We talked about Dinwiddie, the Lively Gafford, combo. Can that continue on the same way that it did in the playoffs and at the end of the season? I think it probably will. But there's a lot of guys that want minutes, a lot of guys that want time, and a lot of guys that want shots. And that's the thing. There's a couple times this past season with Jason Kidd where I would ask him some kind of question about. I asked him a question about some kind of motivation thing, like how do you motivate players? Because he's not really this coach that is the rah like Coach Carter going to give you remember the Titans speech. He's not going to do that. But and he said the only way to motivate players is minutes and shots. He said that to me last season, and I was like, all right, well now he's got a problem where does he have enough? Does he have enough like minutes and shots to give out to people to make it work for everybody? But he has done I think you're right. He has done a really good job of managing guys in the past. I mean, the Luka Kyrie thing has gone over way better than most people even expected it to go. So I'm interested to see Jason Kidd this season and the support with fans. And yeah, you came in right at the time when everything was taken off. It was absolutely wild. You're like, man, why are these people complaining about Jason Kidd so much?
You know what's funny? The first 3 games, I want to say, No, they beat Miami, they beat Charlotte, and then they lost to Detroit and they lost to the Thunder. And those were my first two games in person. And people was like, "Oh, you're bringing the curse from Detroit to Dallas." And then they ended up going to the finals. So
You did witness a 28 game losing streak, so I do.
hey, man, it was an interesting time. I can say that.
Yeah, Ku, our Locked On Pistons host, I kept telling him, I was like, this is your time. Take it, like run with this. And he got stronger as the 28 game losing streak went on. He was getting better. He was turning into Darth Ku. It's really funny. Coming up, I want to keep talking about Jason Kidd because Jason Kidd is like under the radar, rising above the ranks of Mavs like best coaches of all time. And then we'll talk about OMAX and if OMAX can get a rotation spot too. We'll talk about all that and more coming up.
I don't believe you shouldn't be here.
Today's episode of Locked On Mavs is brought to you by BetterHelp. BetterHelp helps you when you have downtimes, or even if you feel like life is going well, but there's still something in the back of your head that you just need to talk through, work through, something like that. I have stuff all the time that I need to talk through, work through, where I'm just like, man, I can't get over this thing. Is there something nagging in the back of my head? I had something recently where I was like, man, I feel like I get in such a weird manic mode, and I had to talk through it. And I talked through it with a therapist, and it really helped me to understand why I feel that way, why my brain goes that direction or whatever. And then all of a sudden now I have tools and skills to work through all these things. So when I get super busy, when I get overwhelmed and all that, I know exactly how to deal with it. If you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. Fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. That's super helpful. Rediscover your curiosity with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. Get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
My first shot, my first make.
All right, Mike, we're here talking about Jason Kidd. We're talking about Spencer Dinwiddie. But I want to keep talking about Jason Kidd because slowly but surely he is kind of like rising about like among the ranks of like best Mavs coaches ever. He's going into his fifth season, and now there's only 3 coaches ahead of him that have coached more years on the Mavericks. Rick Carlisle coached 13 years, 71 playoff games. Dick Motta coached 9 years, 28 playoff games. Don Nelson, 8 years, 43 playoff games. Jason Kidd, now this will be year 5, and he's already done 40 playoff games. So there's only Don Nelson has 3 more playoff games under his belt, and Carlisle has 71, so he's 31 more under his belt. It's wild to already see Jason Kidd rising up the ranks like this. This kind of run has been absolutely wild, considering they missed the playoffs in the middle of one of those. And only Rick Carlisle, Avery Johnson, and Jason Kidd have won a conference finals and actually gone to the NBA finals. It's been kind of amazing to see what Jason Kidd has done in just 3 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people would say that. I think even Jason Kidd would say, I think it helps to have a star player like Luka Doncic. To kind of help along. You got to have a star. We see what Dirk was able to do in those 2 seasons that they went to the finals. Obviously, one didn't result into a NBA championship, but Luka has that experience of getting to his first finals under his belt, and I think that's only going to make him better, especially if he's able to remain healthy. I think that's the big thing. He was banged up for the entirety of the postseason, but he still played almost like an MVP player. I think the fact that Jason Kidd has had a great roster, that's obviously helped with those wins, with those postseason appearances. And even in the year that they didn't make it, it resulted in getting Derek Lively. I know a lot of people were aiming to get Wemby that year, but that's a good consolation prize.
That would have been insane. Oh my gosh.
With that type of potential. And I think he's going to have a really good season too.
What do you think about that idea of coaches developing talent? Because Jason Kidd was brought in as a guy, okay, touted as the guy that developed Giannis, players love him, player coach, all that kind of stuff. Now he's got this team with expectations, the managing of the all the players we talked about already. But then also he has this underlying thing where he's got to develop Lively and Hardy that we talked about, and Quentin Grimes coming in at 24 and maybe developing him, and then OMAX, who we'll talk about in a minute. What do we think about Jason Kidd developing those types of players? Who are you watching this season to see, all right, how can Jason Kidd develop this guy to take another step?
Yeah, that's a really good one because there are a lot of different players on the Mavericks who I think can take a step. I think Hardy can take a step. I think OMAX can take a step. we all know Lively is capable of taking a step. But I do want to see OMAX get to that next level. I think it's going to take more consistency. I know we saw him during Summer League, and he didn't necessarily have a breakout performance as I think the Mavs had wanted, but I think if he's able to kind of slow down in his decision making, because they think he's capable of being a guy that can bring the ball up the floor. We all know he's super athletic and he's able to defend. But if he can take that next step and kind of get to being a rotational player, which they want him to be, I think that'll be good for his development. As far as Jake Kidd, I mean, he's been he's a Hall of Fame point guard. He's played with the best of the best, and I think the fact that he was able to kind of manage different personalities while he was a point guard, I think that helps him as a head coach. And we know he's not the most rah-rah, gonna yell at you. He doesn't show a lot of passion out there, but he's able to use what he has. Like, his demeanor is super chill, but he's still able to get, I think, a good message across. That's everything I've noticed and observed since I've been here, but you may think differently.
No, you're completely right on that. I wonder if Jason Kidd had in his life like a coach that was the scream, yell at you, cuss at you coach. And I wonder if he just said, did the thing that kids do with their parents. Like, I'll never be like that. Like, did the complete opposite and did the turnaround. I'm really interested to see how Jason Kidd and the coaching staff develops OMAX, because in the draft, I was super high on OMAX. Isaac was really high on OMAX when we did our draft profiles about him. And he was the one player that he really wanted in the draft. Like, if we can get, trade back and get somebody, it would be OMAX. He would be the guy to come in and fill that spot. And you're right. In Summer League, he didn't really have that breakout type performance. Now, I don't know that Summer League is the best viewing situation or like the best way to view a player like that is a wing player dependent on other guys to get him going. But for OMAX himself, what do you need to see from him to earn minutes? If you're Jason Kidd, what do you need to see from OMAX for him to earn some minutes or earn some time off the bench on the actual Mavericks this season? Because as it stands right now, to me, I don't even have him in the rotation at all.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we got to see some form of production, whether it's on the rebounding part of the game, whether it's points. Are you accepting the challenge to guard the best perimeter player on the floor? Are you using your communication on defense? That's one. I covered a young team for 2 seasons, and that's one of the most consistent things that I heard, like communication. Some guys don't know what to say. Some guys don't say anything because they don't know what to say. OMAX has a full year. Yeah, you don't want to be wrong. OMAX has a full year under his belt. He's been in these type of pressurized situations where he's seen something before, so he's able to recognize it. And if he's able to kind of capitalize on that experience, I think it'll help him going forward. But I think at the end of the day, we just want to see production. And we want him to stay healthy. I think that's a big thing too. He was only able to play 40 games. He was able to get some experience down in the G League. If he's able to use the experience that he's gotten in the G League at the NBA level, I think that's what the Mavericks want to see.
He played 5 minutes in Game 5, and he played just under 3 minutes in Game 5 and 5 minutes in Game 4 of the NBA Finals. Do you count him as a player that he's now has finals experience?
No, I wouldn't count that.
We can't add that in. He played 53 seconds in Game 1 of the Clippers and then didn't play until the end of the NBA Finals. But to me, I think that experience is invaluable to him. Like, I wouldn't say that he's a player that played in the finals, but he sat and watched. He almost did like a red shirt playoffs, right? Like through the playoffs, and got to sit and look at what was happening. The defensive scheme isn't going to change, so we got to learn that, sit down with Markieff and try and point out what's happening. And you saw all those guys at the end of the bench were trying to learn and take in as much as they could to see that type of competitive basketball. And so I am curious to see how OMAX takes another step forward, because I keep saying this about Hardy. I'm going to say it about OMAX too. Growth is not always linear. You saw that with the Pistons. You don't always go from one block to another block. Sometimes it looks like you take a step back, like in the Summer League this year for OMAX, but maybe he takes a step forward. And he is a guy that wants to guard the best player on the other team. He said that in Summer League. in the summer league practices that he went through. If he does take a step forward, where do you see him potentially like playing, or how much can you see him playing?
Whew, that's a good question. Let's take a look at his minutes per game last year.
Not much, 8.4, but in the games that he played,
8.4. If he's able to get somewhere from 12 to 13, 14, that range, that's a little bit more consistent. But he's got to produce in those minutes as well. He can't just be out there standing in the corner or waiting on the offense or defense to come to him. He has to like be aggressive. If he's able to do that, and it's interesting because like the Mavs don't have a lot of true small forwards on the roster. You got guys who can play both shooting guard and small forward, like Quentin Grimes. Najee Marshall is obviously probably going to be the first forward off the bench. But can PJ is obviously likely going to start. But can OMAX kind of crack that rotation after that? I think it remains to be seen. I think injuries are a part of every season, so there's always going to be a chance for him to come in and get some experience. But I think he'll find his way into the rotation at some point this year.
Man, that would be to have one more big wing like that, a 6'8" wing that wants to defend the best players, that, his shot is coming along and developing, a guy that he always gets the free throw line too, that I'm always impressed by every time I see him play. But I think we're seeing him most of the time for the Legends next season, but we'll see what happens with the Mavs. Mike Curtis, what are you working on right now? Where can people read and follow your stuff?
Yeah, everyone can read and follow me at the Dallas Morning News, dallasnews.com. I'm on Twitter right there, Mike A. Curtis too. What I'm working on right now, I'm actually going to PJ Washington's basketball camp this weekend. It's on Saturday, so it'll be good to catch up with PJ, see what he's been up to this summer. I know he was just in Arkansas with Coach Calipari. He was there with Daniel Gafford, and we saw Derek Lively was there as well. So that's one thing that I've been impressed by the Mavericks. They've made it a point to meet up wherever it is, LA, here in Dallas, at their former colleges, universities where they used to play, and just build chemistry. And I think that's really good for a team that has to figure out a lot of new parts when you add in a guy like Klay Thompson, when you add in a guy like Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes. So I think that's going to be pretty big. Obviously, we know Kyrie and Luka, they're going to be who they're going to be. Luka played for his home country to try to get them to qualify for the Slovenia, to try to get them to qualify for the Olympics, but he's gotten some rest. I'm interested to see how everyone just comes back and kind of gels.
You got to ask PJ Washington why he was wearing an Arkansas shirt the other day. How could he betray Kentucky like that?
Maybe it wasn't Kentucky. Maybe it was Coach Cal.
That's right.
Some players go for the coach.
That's right. Go check out Mike Curtis and go read some of his stuff on the Dallas Morning News. We'll be back next week. Got a big announcement for Locked On Mavs coming the beginning of next week, so make sure you come back and watch on Sunday. Guys, thanks for listening to Locked On Mavs.
Peace out.